diamond, light 'em up in the dark. We know who we are, we're a big bright spark.
Hi, welcome to another episode of Voices. Today we are going to be discussing white privilege. And today I have my panel with me. If you would just go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Lene Grabner-Haig, and I work in the Alexandria area. I live south of here, and I am an ordained minister. I work with Elder Network and City of Villard, and I do pulpit supply in the area, so I find myself in Alexandria almost every day.
And I'm Tom Wheelahan. I moved to Alexandria 5 years ago. I spent most of my working career in education in a variety of positions, and currently I'm semi-retired and work as a associate store manager at Walmart Corporation in their e-commerce division.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Littmer. I was born and raised in Alexandria. My family and I were on the road for about 20 years and have recently, about 5 years ago, moved back to the area. So I'm happy to be back.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, guys. I wanted to do this episode because I think it's so important that we actually dive into the nitty-gritty. And I know that there's so much stereotypes and things attached, and I know that white privilege in general as a term is very polarizing right now. It's very politically inclined. It tends to be incredibly divisive. I think it's important for us to start off with what would be your definition of white privilege.
Well, white privilege, when I first heard the term, I was like, I had no privilege because I'm from a divorced family. My parents, my mom raised us 4 children. We were very poor and struggled all my life. College did not come easy because I had to pay for it bit by bit. It's just, so I did not see myself having privilege, and it kind of irked me when I heard white privilege. Well, just because I'm white does not mean my life was easy. Mm-hmm. And but I'm coming to have a new understanding of the fact that just because I have skin that is white, that offers me privileges that I wasn't even aware of. Mm-hmm. So.
And I think for me, when I think about privilege, it's really any system that gives me or a particular group of people an advantage over other individuals or groups. And the privilege oftentimes is at the expense of the other group. So for me, there's no question that I have benefited personally from this social construct of white privilege.
Yeah, I also believe that white privilege is very real, and I think I've had the same reaction to the words that most white people have, is that that's not me. We grew up in a fairly low income family, and to me privilege was always connected to wealth. Mm-hmm. And an easy life. And mm-hmm. I think as humans we all suffer in different ways. But in our system, I think white privilege is very prevalent, and it's very hidden, mm-hmm. and it's very, I think it's really easy to feel demonized by accepting that, mm-hmm. that it's real. And so I think there's a real resistance to that because you feel bad. You feel mm-hmm. like you're a bad person, and that's not true. It's just a very hidden system.
And I think some people misconstrue privilege, or they connote privilege with class. And they're two different things. Yeah. So whether you're in the 1% group or whether you're a middle class person or you live in the lower class, it's a different set of issues than your privilege, because the privilege is a whole nother system or construction around the benefits that I get because of my whiteness. It's not about how much money I make, it's about that system that protects me. So for example, I don't ever fear going out at night. I don't fear driving my car, being pulled over by the police. I have absolutely no fear. I have no concern about my safety, and that's what my privilege has bestowed on me as a white male.
Male
Yeah.
in particular, because
Yeah.
I was going to say, I'm afraid to go out at night, you know, but I'm female, so.
But I mean,
yeah.
I don't fear that law enforcement is going to shoot me if they pull
Right.
me over and because my tail light is out. I have literally, it doesn't even enter my mind.
And I think that's the point that white privilege in general, it just means that you have some sort of advantage over a person or a group. However, it's inherent. So it's not something you think about. Growing up, obviously, I'm Black, so it's a conversation that's part of everything that we do. Like at 12, while you're having the birds and the bees, we're having, okay, what do you do when you are interacting with law enforcement? And I think that because we have this concept of it's good or bad, or we've done something bad in having privilege, because we're so stuck to the idea that privilege is a socioeconomic advantage over other people, which isn't necessarily true. I think that we all, like I said this in our very first episode, that we all have some sort of privilege. I do have privilege as a woman, just like you have privilege as a man. However, you don't walk around with the idea that you might be raped or, hurt or even hit on in any kind of way. Whereas that's like something that a lot of us women do. We don't get in a car until we look into the back seat, or you just kind of walk a different way, or you think you look over your shoulders a little bit more. There are these things, these precautions that we have to take as women because there's such a thing as male privilege. And the same concept, white privilege is having not to even think about your race in any. A lot of people that I've met, especially since I moved into this community, never even thought about it in their regular everyday lives. So I find it very difficult to discuss, and it's immediately this defense of, well, my life was very hard. I didn't grow up rich or this or that, and my response is always that doesn't mean your life wasn't hard. It just means that your skin color wasn't a reason for that difficult life or that hardship that you went through.
Yeah, I think my first realization was when I thought about our son, when he was a teenager going out. I worried about lots of things, as you always do about your teenagers when they go out. But it never occurred to me that the color of his skin would have, that he would be at risk. I mean, I never had to have that conversation. And when our society started talking about that, I was like, wow, I never thought of that.
And your son is?
What age?
What's his race?
He's white. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
I'm like,
See, right? There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, assuming that.
Right.
I think of that often too, like, when you're describing somebody, like for instance, this woman named Josette, and I'll say she's Black. But if you were white, I wouldn't say that, because it's just an assumption that we're all white or we're not, and if we're not, then, or even on police, when they do police reports on the news, it's always, they always mention the race, and I'm starting to notice they are starting to say a white person, but before it was always a black person, and that's what you keep
And if
hearing.
it wasn't said, it was just assumed.
Yeah, right, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I'm really glad that you said that,
Yeah.
because it's so normalized in our thinking as growing up white that we just don't think about it. We really, and it's easy to make mistakes, and it's easy not to recognize
And
that piece.
privilege allows you not to think about it.
Right.
You know, the conditions of our privilege are invisible.
Right.
But I think language is powerful as well. So in any member group, whether it's transgender or Black American or any member group, when privilege defines them by their characteristic first. So that inherently means that they're just one down from being a whole
Yeah.
person, where nobody defines me, oh, the old white guy. It's I'm just a person.
Yeah.
And so I think when we always refer to people and we identify a characteristic about them, it gives us a power over that group.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to change our language and our narrative around how we address each other as human beings, and not as different groups. I'm not saying that we're blind to the differences, because that for me, diversity is a great thing, but that we recognize how powerful language is, and question ourselves as to why we use language the way we do.
Yep. And our community specifically in Alexandria, how do you think this is relevant, white privilege in general?
Growing up here, so I grew up with people who went to church, who think of themselves as being really great people, and I think most people are. Most people are really well-meaning, but we've never had to really face that issue head on, and so I think in our community, we need to talk more about it. We need to be brave and be willing to talk about it, because I think the silence is really complicit.
How aware do you think we actually are?
Not. I remember I was in a group meeting with a former employer, and there were some Hispanic people in this meeting, and then everybody else is white, and I had just recently had some training on building. It was a training called Building Bridges Across Race and Culture. So I was very interested in watching these dynamics happen in the group, and just the whole unawareness of the privilege of being white, and watching this, where people were invited to talk, and of course, the young white male, he was like, okay, I'll talk right away because I'm in command. Where these other there was two Hispanic people, women, and they were very quiet. They did not speak up. They did not. Maybe not feel safe in that environment, and so part of the things I've learned, so then, I spoke next, because I'm an older white woman, and I'm a minister, so that gives me some extra, privilege, and I thought, so I was very aware of me using my white privilege, but then there's the invitation, so I invited one of the young Hispanic women to speak next. I didn't even wait for somebody to pop up, which was what was happening. The white people were popping up and saying their thing, but they were quiet. So I invited them. I said, I invite you to speak next. And she's like, whoa. And she did. And then she passed the invitation on to her friend who was Hispanic also. And then I was like, that's what we need to do, is like be aware of our privilege, and speak out in just as subtle thing as inviting someone else to speak who may not feel like they have the privilege or the right or whatever it is to speak in that context. So
I think that one of the things that makes it such a, well, of course, we know about white fragility, and I think that that's probably the main reason why it's such a hard conversation to even broach. And this is how subtle I think that privilege works, is that, like, just in this community, I moved here in 2004. I can't go into any store in this town and find makeup that actually applies to my skin. I can go into a Target or a Walmart, those are my choices, and you probably have like a sliver of an aisle, you know, or even just like a little end cap where there is actually products that are marketed towards my skin tone or my hair or anything like that. And just in that right there is privilege at probably the most basic level. You don't have to ever think about, okay, how do I go and get this, or what do I need to do to actually get something that is appropriate for me or my skin tone. We discussed earlier, you know, nudes. And
I got called out for calling. And this was in Fargo, and you know, my friend Crystal, who's black, she was talking about the same issues with the makeup and you know, it was just like, there's no products for me here. Yep. But yeah, she had met me in a department store in Fargo, and she's like, oh, hi, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I am looking for some flesh tone shoes for a wedding we have next weekend. And she's like, whose color flesh? You know? And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, well, you know what I mean. Yep. And she goes, whose color flesh? And I'm like, okay, I'm looking for beige shoes. That, you know. But yeah, we don't even think that. I'm just assuming flesh tone. Well, like Band-Aids too.
Even like I think I just probably within the last like couple of years went to a store and actually, not here in town, actually found a Band-Aid that was like my skin tone. And what's funny is that even being black, I never thought about it really. I just thought like, and when I thought of nude or peach or anything like that, I associated it with white, but I never thought like, oh, there's nothing for me. I automatically thought of flesh tone as white, and it was normal to think about that. If now I find a chocolate or mocha colored something, the brands that actually make that and are conscious of that, it's ridiculously expensive. This very like, it's this very specific tiny market for even being in 2019 and still having to work that hard to find things that are marketed just towards me. And I think that is something, we don't wake up in the morning thinking about how what I look like affects what happens to me on the outside. I now know that since I've lived here, I now am very aware of my race, and that's only because it's the first thing everyone notices, you know? So there's no immediate room to be Joe, because I need to make sure that you've accepted the fact that I am black. And then our relationship can kind of take on after that. And if that's not something you even are conscious of or even want to discuss, it's very immediate in our interaction together. Okay, so I think the most important part of this conversation is how can white people in our community be allies? How can we, I mean, racism, things like that are just, I think a lot of it is, again, inherent it's things that we say and do that we aren't fully aware of. I think the concept of racist is bad or non-racist is good. It's very nuanced because there's so many layers to that, and there's things that we do on a very general everyday basis that we don't even realize are normal and microaggressions. Like when we think about where we're going to live and the neighborhoods that we're going to live in, we think about what's good neighborhoods. And a good neighborhood generally would mean that there's probably less people of color, and we associate that with more crime or more poverty. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think that's absolutely true.
Yep.
And I think the cycle is that privilege, white privilege perpetuates that, because when you have these barriers and you make it harder for people to access resources, they're necessarily going to, on average, potentially have less resources because we're attempting to keep them from them.
Yep.
And so, see, I was right. You know, this is not the best neighborhood. These people do live in poverty. You know, and it just perpetuates itself. And so we're justified in feeling privileged, and our assumptions, we validate our assumptions even though they're not correct.
Yeah.
And so I think in this community, or in any community, having the conversation at the level that it's occurring. In other words, it's not about individuals. You can be a good person and be racist.
Yep.
You can have good intentions and be racist.
Yep.
And so we have to just dismantle the structure of it and look at it, you know, objectively. And I think when, in a white privileged society, and I was in education for over 24 years, the curriculum, cultural diversity or anything about races, it's not in the curriculum. It's not required. If you're in and it never happens in grade school. So if you're in college, you have the option of taking a cultural diversity class, but we don't. It's not a priority in education.
Yep.
And so that's telling me that, you know, whose education, who's making these decisions, and clearly it's the power structure saying, you know what, we're not going to tackle this issue.
Yeah.
You know, and how many, 140 years after, the Emancipation Proclamation, we're still struggling with this issue. And I don't know if anyone's read the book, The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.B. Du Bois. He said that the problem of the 20th century is going to be the color line. And it's true. His words are more prescient today than they were when he wrote them. And so we've never tackled the challenge at the right level, so it persists.
So I want to thank you guys for actually being here and having this conversation with me. I know it's super, super hard to even talk about. It's a sensitive conversation. Like I've said all season long, my biggest thing is to bring humanity to these conversations, to realize that there's a human on the other end of everything that we discuss in terms of discrimination or any kind of setback that actually puts you at a disadvantage in society. So I just want to keep having these conversations. I want to make them normal to have in Alexandria, that it's okay to have them. We shouldn't be so afraid of the R word. We shouldn't be so afraid of saying these things because it's real. And it's my experience, it's your experience. We get to live in this country together, and I think it's important that we actually acknowledge it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi guys, thank you for watching another episode of Voices. I want to thank you for actually getting through this conversation with us. It was a really tough one to get through. Our next episode, we're going to be focusing on the Black and Brown police experience. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be the first to know whenever we come out with new episodes. Thank you to the Lure Lake Bar for allowing us to film in your amazing facility. And if you want more resources on the conversation, look till the end of the video for the links and check the description box. Thank you.
We are, we're a big bright spark. We know how to take the lead and we aren't afraid. Shake up all the rules, pretend like they were never made. You know it's real.